Randomized Gaming.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am once again Random Gamer River, and today we have a very special randomized gaming video. As you can see from the title, this is actually our complete guide to 50, 60Hz PAL Saturn games, to give you a guide on whether a PAL game is 50 or 60Hz, and what's the best option to play. Should you import an NTSC copy or should you go for a PAL copy? So, first off, I'm going to say this video is only actually a little promotional for the actual article itself. The article, as you can see, I'm just linking up an annotation note here, is actually on our blog, and that gives you a full breakdown of every single game available on the Sega Saturn. Well, I say every single game. We're currently missing 3 games that we've not been able to test among us in the randomized gaming team, and some of the guys who originally helped us compile this list. So first off, I should say a huge thank you to S3N and Slicer1000, who originally started compiling the list way back in 2001. We've known they've been working on it for some time, and they haven't updated it in some time, even though they have been still ever increasing their Saturn collection. A couple of us got in contact with them and said, look, we've got these games, you've got these games, can we work together to finish off this list? And I said, yeah, let's go ahead. Admittedly, a couple of those, they are actually background members of the randomized gaming team. We thought, you know what, this is such a great resource, we thought we'd finally try and get it through. So the point of this video, I'm just going to show you what the various states of PAL optimization are and show you a few videos of some of the games running in PAL and NTSC. So to keep this video nice, short and sweet, I'm not going to explain the 50, 60 Hz and what they are. If you don't know, then I'm just going to do a little card at the top there, and that's our Mega Drive video where I explain the difference between 50, 60 Hz. By now, if you're watching this video, then you should know what 50, 60 Hz is. Basically, it's the frequency that the TVs used to run at, and the PAL games used to suck as a result, and they were slower and borders, etc., etc. Basically, 50 Hz was horrible, 60 Hz was good. They shouldn't have been, but it's the way the TVs were done, and Nintendo and Sega not optimizing their consoles. Getting that out of the way, and I said the card's up the top there if you want to watch the Mega Drive and we explain it. Basically, Sega did try to optimize a lot more of their Saturn games for the 32-bit era, so they were actually much better. So technically the PAL games at the time were much better, and Sega did a better job of optimizing their games 50 Hz than even Sony. Sony did a pretty rubbish job as well, and Sega actually did try, and they did, for the large part, optimize a lot of the big-selling Japanese games, and a lot of rich developers did optimize their games as well. And one thing they could do with the Saturn that they couldn't do on the Mega Drive is they could adjust the aspect ratio so it was near virtually full screen at 50 Hz. So they looked almost as good as the NTSC versions. The slight caveat being that even a fully optimized PAL game in most cases didn't run as fast as a 60 Hz version or have quite as full a screen. There were still some slight borders at the top and bottom. So to begin with, I should probably describe the difference between unoptimized and PAL optimized games. And is there a way to tell whether a game is PAL optimized or unoptimized? Well, yes and no. You can kind of take an educated guess at what might be optimized and what isn't, but even then, as we found out, sometimes when we took educated guesses at some of them, sometimes we were right, sometimes we were proven right, and sometimes we were proven wrong. And it does very much depend. There were certain developers more prone not to optimize games, and there were other developers prone to optimize games. And it does very much vary, because as you'll see in the picture there, Shining Force 3, which was a big Sega game, and Panzer Dragoon Saga both don't appear to have any form of optimization. In fact, Shining Force 3 has none whatsoever. Capcom virtually did not bother to optimize any of their games. They just used to be the NTSC versions of the code running at 50 Hz, which is great because then you just need to get a 60 Hz switch and just suddenly up to full screen. And even some of the big Sega games, like on top of Shining Force 3, Mr. Bones, and a lot of the Acclaim games as well, a lot of their shooters and beat-em-ups, in fact, just generally, for the large majority, if it wasn't a first-party developed Japanese game, it was likely going to be unoptimized. For the PAL optimized side, though, there's a bit of more hit and miss. Now, you would expect most British developers to optimize their games. That wasn't always the case. In fact, even Core Design, one of the big British developers at the time, don't appear to have optimized many of their own games, perhaps because they knew about 50, 60 Hz and thought, we'll just leave it, or perhaps they just didn't quite be bothered. Now, it's not always easy to tell if a game's been optimized. Some games, like Manx TT, like Sega Ages Collection Volume 1, have a more stealth optimization, and I'll come to a bit of that later. But to the main part, to tell what games are optimized, certainly Sega Rally is, Virtua Fighters 2 is, any of the big Sega games that were released at the time done by the Japanese. So basically any of the AM2 games are almost certainly going to have some form of optimization in, and quite a lot of the big sellers as well. So any game they thought was going to be big. Any of the end-life Sega games, like Shining Force 3 and Saga, didn't appear to be optimized. And I think one of the last games to be optimized was House of the Dead, and then you had a break period where games like Shining Force 3 and Panzer Saga weren't optimized, although ironically Deep Fear, the final Sega Saturn game, has some PAL optimization. Or I should say the final Sega Saturn game released in Europe, but that has it has barely any PAL optimization. The aspect ratio is not corrected, and the game runs with huge boards, and there's probably slightly to do with the video, was probably something about the video aspect was optimized, although at 60Hz most of the video runs fine, but what does occur at 60Hz, as you'll notice if you've ever played it, and we'll video this at some point, is there's a huge nasty green bar at the top of the screen that suddenly appears, and there's been speculation that it crashes or not, although we've had conflicting reports on that. And we've actually been trying to play through Deep Fear and have got over halfway at 60Hz, but yeah, it's slightly aggravating when you've got that huge horrible bar. Now, the other problem with PAL optimization, and this is what infuriated me a lot of the time when we started collecting for Sega consoles, and why these days I prefer to go for NTST copies of any game that's any form of PAL optimization, is there's actually three types, basically, of PAL optimization, or what we've divided up. Technically, you could just say it's just PAL optimized and unoptimized, but some PAL optimized games were terribly optimized. In Knight's case, for example, the only optimization we can find against an NTSC version, we've got a Japanese NTSC Sega Saturn copy as well, is that they optimized the two-player mode. Now, the two-player mode doesn't run in PAL if you have a 60Hz switch, and if you switch to 60Hz, two-player mode doesn't run. The rest of the game runs fine, so that's an appalling PAL optimization. It may even be a slight bug fix for a PAL optimization. But basically, the rest of the game runs fine except for the two-player mode. So it's part optimized, but for the majority of it isn't. And those are the worst case scenarios, because most of it runs fine. There's a bit that doesn't. Again, although it's not shown here, Sonic 3D Blast. That, despite being developed by Traveller's Tales, an English company, is mainly the game speed and stuff, isn't optimized in PAL, and you actually got huge borders again in the actual video. What is optimized, however, is the 3D bonus stages, and they don't play at 60Hz, and because they don't play at 60Hz, you can't finish the game. Another one, as you'll see, which we actually demoed, got some video of for this video itself, is Earthworm Jim 2. That, again, is badly optimized in that they've optimized the sprite and running speed. So although the aspect ratio looks horrendous, the music doesn't appears to be running a bit slow at 50Hz. The game itself, the run speed is set to 60, and when you set it to 60Hz, all the sprites disappear from the actual gameplay, and you can't see anything. The background's there, the sprites all vanish, and you'll see that in the coming video. Now, other optimizations like Virtua Fighter 2 are what we're kind of regarding as generally PAL optimized. Basically, in Virtua Fighter 2 case, the fighting gameplay is fully PAL optimized. The actual menu screens, bizarrely, and the character selection screens aren't PAL optimized. So there's this weird sudden aspect ratio change. It looks unprofessional and it looks very sloppy, but it occurs. And then there's a few rare cases like in Sega Rally where we've actually, again, we got Sega Rally Plus, the Japanese edition, and compared against the European version, there's virtually no difference, not even speed or anything, because that's been fully optimized. Now, those fully optimized games are very, very rare. Generally, it was some of the later beat-em-ups and basically the Central racing games. And I say by Central, I'm referring to Daytona and Sega Rally, basically. They were the two that were best optimized. Even Touring Cars, not quite optimized on some of the menu screens, but that was Touring Cars, again, very heavily optimized. Now, the hard optimized games, you can play at 60Hz. Basically, the PAL optimized ones generally have issues, and the fully optimized ones are just completely balked at 60Hz. You're often missing huge amounts of the screen. You've often got screen blur, as you'll see with Virtua, which again is another game that's almost near perfectly optimized. In fact, it's quite sad the fact that Virtua was very well optimized. I adored it. I loved it on the Sega Saturn, and that's what made me such a huge fan of the series. Unfortunately, in PAL land, it didn't sell well. I must have been one of the few people who actually bought it at full price because the game sadly tanked and they never released the sequel over here, which was a huge shame. But it is a brilliant game, and the PAL version is basically very, very heavily optimized. And as you'll see from the video, it's 60 Hz, the whole bottom of the screen blurs, and the title screen was also a bit funky, although we didn't show that in the video. Basically, the whole gameplay screen is just corrupt, and you just can't play the game like that. You can technically still play the game, but you don't want to have that, what's going on in the bottom of the screen, present in your face all the time. It's basically the whole, it's just like blurring graphical distortion that looks horrible, and it's probably not good for the Saturn either. So that's kind of a bit of why we originally wanted to create this list, because a large chunk of the games are utterly unoptimized and playing at incorrect speeds at 50 Hz, but for the ones that are optimized, you can't play them at 60 Hz or else, because some can be rendered unplayable. So basically, if you're an importer, we discovered, like we did, you had to know which games you're going to need to, which PAL games you want to import and play, and which PAL games you need to get an NTSC copy. So if you've got a Japanese Saturn and you're using an action replay, or you've got a region switcher mod, you want to know which PAL games you want to import. If you decide, well, I'd quite like to play this PAL game because it wasn't released in Japan, perhaps, or maybe you want the English version of an RPG and you don't want to play through the Japanese version, which is fair enough. Then you want to know, are you going to be okay with the PAL version at 60 Hz, or is the PAL version going to be unplayable, and do you need an NTS, an American copy? Or are you going to have to just bite the bullet and go for a Japanese copy? Because, of course, not every game that was released in Japan was released in Europe or was released in America. In fact, there are some games that are region exclusive as well. I think in the PAL there's about 10 exclusive European games that didn't see release outside of Europe. Don't quote me directly on that number. But to begin with, I think we'll show you a couple of the PAL optimized games and some of the effects of how they look at 50 and then what happens when you put them into 60. And I think we'll start with the aforementioned Virtual On before I move on to Earthworm Jim. And as you can see from the video, this is the European PAL version of Virtual On played at 50 Hz the way it's supposed to be.
Select your machine. Driving. First mission. Round 1. Get ready. Round 2. Get ready.
Okay, and that was the 50 Hz video, and this is the 60 Hz one, and you will notice from the get-go that the bottom of the screen is already missing, and as you can see from the rest of this video, it's only going to get worse.
Select your machine. Driving. First mission. Round 1. Get ready. Round 2. Get ready.
So, as I mentioned earlier, we will take a look at Earthworm Jim 2 now, and this is the game running, as you'd expect, at 50Hz, but keep an eye at the top of the bottom of the screen, as you'll notice the aspect ratio is not at all correct for the PAL version at 50Hz. The rest of the game speed, you'll certainly notice, does look and feel very fluid and very fast.
Way cool! Way cool! Wow! Taylor! Wow! Way cool! Way cool! Wow! 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 Wow!
Now let's switch up Earthworm Jim 2 into 60Hz, and at first glance, based on the Sega logo, everything looks good. In fact, the aspect ratio is now correct, and the game, as I said, it appears to be running correctly, but as soon as you get in game, after the opening few frames of animation, everything goes a bit AWOL, to put it mildly. I'm not sure whether this is some form of region protection or not. In fact, the NTSC version may do the same when put into PAL, but as we don't have an NTSC copy, I can't say for certain. It may purely be a PAL optimization issue, or it may be an issue with both the NTSC and the PAL versions, but certainly a Japanese or US copy of Earthworm Jim 2 is on our hit list at some point to check it out. As you can see here, I had to memorise the level quite perfectly in order to play through this section. Seeing as you can't see where Jim is, if you don't know what you're doing exactly, you're not going to get very far at all.
Tender. Wow! Way cool! Wow! 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 Wow!
So next up, we're going to take a quick look at Virtua Fighter 2. Now, Virtua Fighter 2 is heavily PAL optimized, but it's one of those ones where they didn't optimize every aspect. It appears the high resolution aspects of the game were fully optimized, but some of the low resolution menu screens weren't, so it switches between ratios. You'll see it go from squished 4:3 back to sort of standard 4:3, especially when you watch the title screen to the option menu back to the title screen, and again with the character selection screen. It's a bit weird, and they should have really finished it off and optimized it fully. But this is the game running at PAL at 50Hz.
What a knucklehead! Fight! 2, ready, go! KO! elderly.
Right now, time for a look at Virtua Fighter 2 at 60Hz. And as I mentioned in the previous 50Hz section, this section you'll notice that because of the optimization, the original title screen and the optimized elements suffer from overscan. But as we go to the option menu and the character selection screen, they are actually at the correct ratio for 60Hz. So it's a weird, as I said, you'll see some elements are now running at the correct speed, other elements are running too fast, and the gameplay itself is of course running far too fast.
Fight! 1, ready, go! Make it a habit to fight the elderly. Fight! 2, ready, go! What a knucklehead!
Now, the last PAL optimized game I'm going to show you is Sega Touring Car. However, with a bit of a twist, I'm actually going to show you the PAL version at 50Hz, the PAL version at 60Hz, and the NTSC-J version at 60Hz. That's the Japanese edition. For those of you who don't know what NTSC-J is. And I'm actually going to show you all three at once, so you can see a side-by-side comparison of how the speed differentiates. So you'll see, and from the get-go, that the PAL version at 50Hz is still the slowest, even though it's optimized. The NTSC version is the correct speed. The PAL version at NTSC or 60Hz is actually running too fast. And it's quite interesting. You also see how badly optimized the PAL version is at points, with the aspect ratio again changing in some of the menus in Touring Car. So it's a really interesting look, and you realise that perhaps the PAL version is really best avoided at all costs on some of the optimized games. So just confirm, the NTSC-J version will be in the bottom right, as you can see here. The PAL version at 50Hz will be in the bottom left, and in the top is the PAL version at 60Hz. And at the start, I'm just going to show you the intro, and that's been frame synced at exactly the same frame animation from the very beginning, but it will desync very quickly. So eagle-eyed viewers will have also noted that the PAL 60Hz version, or when forced into 60Hz, the optimized version does demonstrate graphics corruption again. There's the arcade word lags and a few other things that are ghosting on screen. Again, there's another game that should not be played at 60Hz at all. Now, in this next bit, I'm just going to reframe sync it so you can see the qualifying lap. But keep your eye on the PAL version and the NTSC version. They start pretty much at the same time. However, if you follow them through correctly, although my driving isn't great, you'll see that the clock in the NTSC version seems to be going at a different speed to the PAL version, even though they should in theory be going at roughly the same speed. And in fact, you'll notice that I'm getting slightly faster times on the NTSC version, even though my driving's not particularly great on either. And you'll see at points where I'm running side by side, having not crashed, and you'll see that I start speeding ahead on the track on the NTSC version. That's because the PAL clock has not been correctly optimized to match the original NTSC version, and this is one case in point where the PAL version is such a botched job that you really should just go for the NTSC version unless you don't have an ability to play import games. So as you can see from the Sega Touring Car comparison, it certainly shows some interesting issues between the NTSC version and the PAL version. So, not going to look at optimization at the minute anymore. We're going to look at some of the unoptimized games and how, of course, they are improved at 60Hz. And to start with, I'm going to choose one of the Capcom fighters because all the Capcom fighters are unoptimized. And we're going to take a look at X-Men Children of the Atoms. Now, apologies, I was going to hopefully try and do a side-by-side comparison on this one, but I could not get the same fight. So I thought I'd do a full screen fight to show you the screen ratio really clearly. But first fight at 50Hz will be me fighting Sentinel, and then at 60Hz it'll be me fighting a Mega Red. Yes, no matter, I tried about 15 times to get to fight Sentinel. Every time it's kept me giving other characters, but it's certainly interesting to see the slowdown and the border aspect ratios and border loss that occurs in 50Hz compared to the smoothness of the 60Hz version.
Round one, fight! Up the glass, up the glass, up the glass. Keep flight. Up the glass. Up the glass. Up the glass. You win. Round two. Fight. Up the glass. Up the glass. Up the glass. Keep flight. Up the glass. 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 You lose. Round three. Fight. Keep flight. Keep flight. Up the glass. Keep flight. Up the glass. 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 You win. Yes. X-Men. Round one. Fight. Optic flash. Optic flash. Optic flash. Deep flight. Omega strike. Optic flash. You win. Round 2. Fight. Omega strike. Optic flash. Omega strike. Optic flash. Omega destroyer. Optic flash. Optic flash. Deep flight. Optic flash. You lose. Round 3. Fight. Optic flash. Omega destroyer. You lose.
Now there is actually a slight irony in the fact I'm showing you the Saturn port of an arcade game, as in a number of cases, well, the Saturn ports were often arcade perfect for the NTSC version, but as soon as they came to the home PAL version, because they were 17.5% slower and had the borders at the top and bottom, they no longer were arcade perfect, so you couldn't actually ever play an arcade perfect experience in the PAL land. And I should point out, European arcades used NTSC TV, so they were always 60 Hz and full screen. So you could play them at full speed the way the developers intended in the arcade, but as soon as you got the home version, playing it on your Saturn in Europe, unless you had a 60 Hz switch or you had a Japanese Saturn, you were playing an inferior port. Now I'm going to show you Galactic Attack next, and that really was a game that was basically arcade perfect for the home version. And as you'll see, the PAL version really suffers at 50 Hz compared to when it's 60 Hz. Fortunately, many of the arcade ports, it was utterly unoptimized, so a quick flip to 60 Hz makes it an arcade perfect game, but it's very interesting to see. And interesting, I'm going to do this as a side-by-side comparison, so you'll quickly see the speed loss. And remember, I'm not having an NTSC copy in this version, it's an unoptimized game, it's actually the PAL version just run at 50 and 60 Hz. And just to confirm with the video you're about to watch, on the left video on the screen will be the PAL version at 50 Hz, the right video on the screen will be the PAL version at 60 Hz. Now, the third and final unoptimized game I'm going to show you is the wonderful Puzzle Bobble 2, known to many as Buster Move 2, and yes, I do hate that rename, I really do. It's a wonderful arcade game, it's utterly unoptimized, as was its sequel Buster Move 3. And just going to do a straight off comparison so you can see the difference. And again, left is the PAL version at 50Hz, right is the PAL version at 60Hz. It just looks and plays so much better at 60Hz. So the final point I want to make, which is actually a really, really important one, is what many people may not be aware is Sega were very lazy at porting over games, and a couple of the other developers were as well, in the 32-bit era. As a result, to get ports to the West quickly, they would often cut out content that required translation work. As a result, a number of games are quite heavily cut down from the Japanese releases for the Western one. Notably, in one case, Baku Baku Animals featured an awful lot of text that was subsequently just simply removed for the Western release. There was even a League mode as well. Now, while the League mode was still in the European version, it was hidden under a cheat code, but all the cutscenes during arcade mode were all taken out. The same with Clockwork Knight. There was a number of cutscenes between characters simply removed for the Western release. And to showcase this, I'm actually going to take a quick look at the PAL version and the NTSC version of the Sega Ages collection, particularly Outrun, because remember what we said about racing clocks earlier, as you saw in Sega Touring Car. Well, Outrun suffers really bad as a result. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that, in fact, the Japanese release of Outrun, Afterburner, and Space Harrier were all on 3 separate discs, so as you might guess, there has been some content removed. Indeed, Outrun featured an arranged soundtrack on top of the original arcade tracks. These were all totally removed. And interestingly, some bugs have also been implemented in the PAL version because Working Design did the collection and they appear to have done a rather rushed job of it. Afterburner also has some of the music tracks playing in the wrong order in the PAL version. So in all 3 of these games' cases, it's actually best to get the original Japanese releases and not the kind of cobbled together collection release. But for the PAL version the collection is about to show you, things get even worse because for Outrun, the timer and the game speed have been completely altered and it ruins the gaming experience. In fact, it's fair to say the PAL version of Outrun bears no relation to the original arcade game. And to begin with, I just want to show you how badly the timer has been altered for the game. So we're going to play the PAL version at 50Hz and the Japanese NTSC version at 60Hz. Again, side by side, left will be PAL, right will be the NTSC Japanese release, and you'll spot from the get-go something is very, very wrong with the timer because both versions will be synced. And for the first part of this video, I'm going to stay at the race line and you'll just see the timers tick down. The second part, we will then race against one another for the first section. You'll see the game speed changes and you'll quickly realise something is very, very wrong. And perhaps to make a final point about it, what I'm going to say is you would expect the PAL clock to be slower than the NTSC version if it was done correctly, or at least the same time. The one thing you wouldn't expect is for it to be faster. And as you will see, there's something definitely very wrong with the timing clock. So pay attention to the timer in the top left-hand corner of the screen.
Ready?
That's the countdown timer, not the lap timer in the top right. So as you can see, even though the PAL and the NTS video were actually frame synced at the beginning, the timer is actually quicker in the PAL version than the original NTSC version. And as the NTSC version is the intended gameplay version, something is very, very wrong with the PAL version. And as we're going to show you now in this quick comparison race, you'll see that the speed of the games don't quite match. The NTSC version is slightly faster, although unfortunately due to my driving, I basically cross the finish line at roughly the same time as I lose some speed on the NTSC midway through this race bit. But you'll notice that I still have more time left over, and on the NTSC version I do the PAL version. So effectively the PAL version is the difficulties increase quite exponentially because the timer does not correctly match the frame rate. Indeed, even though you'll notice the time I get on the PAL version is slightly later than I do on the NTSC version, despite the fact that I take slightly longer on the NTSC version to cross the finish line, which says there's a real serious mismatch in terms of gameplay that fundamentally breaks the game. So the PAL version of Outrun is broken and should be avoided at all costs. Because of the changes to the timing, it means the game is substantially more harder and inconsistent with the original arcade release. And in case you're wondering, for this race only, I'll be using the arranged soundtrack, which is only on the Japanese release. Now, Outrun isn't the only game you should seriously consider getting an NTSC version of. Many other games, even X-Men Children of the Atom that I showed earlier, does have some problems with the PAL version in the fact that the Juggernaut code to play as Juggernaut in the two-player mode is missing from the European release. Quite why that one's missing, we're not sure. I suspect in the Juggernaut's case, it might be there was a bug when they did the PAL version. They didn't check that the two-player code still worked. However, Marvel Super Heroes, its sequel, suffered from having Anita removed from both the US and European release. Anita, the little girl that follows Donovan around in Darkstalkers, it suggested that Marvel weren't too keen on having Hulk and Captain America beat up a little girl. But still, she is a playable character in the Japanese version, and she is missing from the European and US one. As again with Decon Athletes, a Sega title, and Winter Heat, both feature secret characters in the Japanese versions that are missing in the European versions. Jeff Jonas from the original game is missing in Winter Heat, and there was a secret character, a Japanese contender in the original game, Athlete Kings, or Decon Athletes as it's known in Japan, which is missing from the PAL version. There are other examples as well. Fighting Vipers has Pepsi Man, well, he was removed due to a license. Fighting Vipers, the Japanese version, actually has a number of bug fixes and improvements over the PAL release. In fact, if you check the revision numbers, the Japanese revision version is about 10 revisions up over the PAL release, which is quite a serious game change, as it means there's a number of improvements to it. Last Bronx as well, the Japanese version was on 2 discs, and of course the European version and the US version was only on 1 disc. So you really have to weigh up when looking at these games which one you want to get, because often you may think, oh, I'll get the PAL version. Well, actually, even if the PAL version is optimized or not optimized and runs perfectly at 60Hz, check to make sure there aren't some bonuses that are present in the Japanese version that aren't in the English version, because if so, you might as well get the Japanese or the NTSC version. Even for a British developed game, another key one is 3D Lemmings. Bizarrely, the European version is one of the few games that actually shows you the version number in the option menu, and you can go in and check. The European version is a few revisions down on the Japanese version and doesn't support the mouse. The Japanese version has a number of improvements and also supports the mouse. So that's a British developed game where the European owners get screwed. Go for the Japanese version because it's actually better than the European version, despite the fact it was developed by a British studio. I don't know what was going on there. That's just some of the madness that goes on with the Saturn. Again, as mentioned, Baku Clockwork Knight's missing content, so there's a lot of games that did get released in the West that actually the Japanese version is better all round. So that's where I'm going to end this discussion. We'll leave it there. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope this benefits you. Like I said before, do check out the PAL list. We are currently only missing 3 games. They are Frankenstein for the Eye of the Monster, Courier Crisis, and Pinball Graffiti. We've got a demo of Pinball Graffiti, and I think that was 60Hz. I've had a few people contact me about Pinball Graffiti as well, suggesting that's unoptimized. However, I want to be certain about any game. That's the list of known Saturn games in case there's one hidden out there. But we do, ideally, if anyone's going to contact me with information about the missing games we don't have, please, ideally I'd like to see videos so we can see directly for ourselves whether it looks optimized or not. But hopefully we'll finish that list, and at some point I'll put a little annotation here as and when we update the list with the missing games. But to do, again, check out the blog, check out the games list if you've got any questions as to whether you think it might be PAL, NTSC. We are still tweaking the list at the minute, so we are making a few updates. But hopefully you'll find it a very useful resource. So if you've got a question about which game, whether you need to, as I said, 50, 60 Hz, check out the link on the blog. I am Random Gamer Riven. Thanks for watching. If you like our content, please do subscribe, and please give us a like as well. If you like this video, it's always good to get bumped up in the rankings for people watching our content. Thanks very much, and keep supporting us. Thank you, and goodbye for now.